In 2013, I got a phone call. Carl phoned me. It was the night before UPW was starting, and I was living in the Canary Wharf area. Carl rang me up and he said, listen, what are you doing later? So I said, well, I've just finished the crew meeting. I'm in Canary Wharf. So he said, why don't you come to the Britannia Hotel? I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. And he's got some people here from Russia. And I went to the hotel and he introduced me to Steve. Steve introduced me to Gil and Katya and 25 other Russians. And I just want to tell you, this guy is an amazing dude. He's got a fantastic, colorful past. He's got some great stories. And no doubt what he shares with you now is really going to, I think it will impress you. It will also inspire you to think about what you're up to in your own life. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please give it up for my friend Steve Karbaron. Love you, brother.
Love you, brother. Well, so as I said, what a great day we've had. And I thank you all for staying and all the guys who shared with you. I've learned a lot today and I thank you all for that. And I'm just going to teach you a little bit about me and a little bit about my dream. And I hope you'll buy into it. Now, I asked Alan to write a word on this board for me. Can someone read that out? Okay, that's what you all see. Now, I often said throughout my life that word doesn't exist for me. It's not in my vocabulary. But I've noticed something very special about that word. And it happened this week, in a very enlightened week for me, as I'll explain to you. So I'm just going to do what Tony says. I'm going to put a 2mm mark just there. And now can someone read that out to me? Impossible. That's what impossible says if you shift it 2mm. And that's what we're going to do. When I say we, I'm talking about everyone in this room and everyone else in the world. We're going to make a shift. But before I get into that, I'm going to take you back to 2004. In 2004, it was October 2004, Carl, who's not in this room, he should be sitting there, but he's not. Carl took me to my first UPW. It was my first experience of Tony Robbins, although I'd experienced quite a lot of the information from Carl. And it was an amazing, enlightening weekend for me. Now, Carl and I met when we were back in our crazy days doing acid house parties and everything else. We were leaders in that field. And so when Carl took me along to this, it was like I did 4 days there and I felt like I'd been to 4 raves in one weekend, and I hadn't done any alcohol, any drugs, any sex, anything else. But I came out of there, 4 raves, and you know what? I had an enormous amount of energy. Now, when I went to raves, I didn't have any energy at the end of it, but I came out with all this energy, and I wanted to transmit that into my life and move it on. But I didn't really know how that was going to work, as many of us don't. But what I did get from Carl, and I was very appreciative, is when I was pushing a little bit and talking about what I wanted to do, and what I wanted to do was leave England, because I spent a lot of time here and I loved it dearly, but I wanted a fresh start. I wanted something new. He told me, yes, carry on talking about it. Talk to the people. Don't be scared, because they'll tell you when they don't want to hear your story. So never be scared to repeat yourself if you think you're on the right track. There was one guy, I'm in the eyewear business, I'm an optician by profession. There's one guy, he's actually the CEO of Sunglass Hut. And he called me up, it was a Thursday evening in January. I answered the phone and he said, Stephen, are you still looking to get out of England? I said, yeah, I'd really like to. And he said, have you ever thought of Moscow? Carlo? No, I have never thought of Moscow. Carlo was his name, by the way. He said, well, there's a guy that I'm seeing tonight. He's got this business in Moscow. It's an optical chain, and they're looking for a buyer, and I think the job will suit you perfectly. So I said, okay. He said, I'm meeting him for a drink this evening in St. John's Wood. I was in Hampstead. I lived in Hampstead. I said, okay, I'll come down. Let's have a meeting. Let's see where it goes. I went down there, cut a long story short. Next day, we had an amazing lunch meeting. The following Thursday, I was on an aeroplane to Moscow. I spent the weekend in Moscow. It was a 7-star weekend. They took me to all the best places. They took me to restaurants, clubs. We did see some of the shops as well. But they basically persuaded me that this was where I should be. And on the Sunday, I sat down at dinner or lunch, and we went through all of my requirements, all of their requirements. And I said, okay, where's the contract? I want to sign. And my future boss said to me, well, don't you want to go home and think about this? No, I want to sign now. I want to burn the boats. This is for me. This is the right decision. All I can do is go home and change my mind. And I knew that would be a mistake. So I signed the contract. And I went to Moscow. 2-year contract. I stayed for, I haven't got enough fingers, 11 and a half years. It was an amazing experience. And during that time, actually during Tony Robbins' UPW earlier, I'd signed up to Mastery University. And during that time, I went to Mastery University, flying from Moscow each time. And I learned so much. But a Date with Destiny, if anyone's been on Date with Destiny, you have to do a mind map. And you have to draw what's going to happen for you in the next 10 years. Where you're going to be in 10 years' time. What do you want in life in 10 years' time? So I drew my picture. I had a wife. I had a child. I had a house on the beach. I had a nice car. I had a comfortable living. I had everything I wanted. And it seemed you had to place it something difficult, something quite far away. But, you know, it wasn't totally unachievable, but it was going to be a tough one. 10 years later, I was at UPW with the Russians. Now, you heard a little about the Russian story. That happened a couple of years earlier. That was 2013 that we met with Alan, and we went for the first time with 25 Russians to UPW. Once again, Carl, who's a very important part of my life, Carl had introduced me to Success Resources and asked if we could be the agents for Russia, bringing people. And I knew this company called Meet Partners, and I introduced Gil and Katya into this idea. And I brought them to Tony Robbins, to UPW, for the first time in 2013. And it changed their lives completely. I mean, so much so that they're bringing 1,600 people to UPW this year. Now, 2 years later, in 2015, when I joined them I was already by this time moved to Spain, which is why I wasn't working with them anymore, but I joined them as an ambassador, and I still work as an ambassador to the Russian brigade. And at the end of the UPW, we had on the last day, we had a meeting all morning, and then we had a breakdown lunch with all the Meet Partners team. And they asked me to speak and tell them a little bit about my story, which I did. And what I realized was, this was 2015. And do you remember what happened to me in 2005? I moved to Russia and I did my Date with Destiny. So it was exactly 10 years later. And where had I found myself? Where I live now in Barcelona. Just outside, actually, in Castelldefels, in my nice house on the beach, with my nice BMW convertible and my wife and my little 7-year-old darling son, who I love so much. And when we were there, and I was standing and telling this story, I thought, okay, what can I do now? What's my next 10-year plan? And it's got to be something out there, something that is achievable, because nothing's impossible, but it's just out there. And I said to everyone, I stood up there and I said, I want to be part of making world peace. I want to be a catalyst, somehow involved. And they said, how are you going to do that? I've got no fucking idea. But if I don't talk about it, if I don't put it out there, then that idea will stay an idea in my head and it will never become a reality. Because everything starts with a thought, and a thought becomes an idea. But if you don't get it out there, and if you don't take some sort of action, then it just remains an idea. So I took action, and I spoke to people, and I said, actually, you know what would be great? If in 10 years' time we can get Tony Robbins to Russia, I believe that will be amazing because the Russian people are amazing people. They want to learn, and they're not what the mainstream media portrays them as. They're very different. So that was my 10-year plan. Let's get Tony to Russia. So can you imagine my thrill, but also my disappointment when in February, Gil calls me up and says September the 1st, Tony Robbins is going to be in front of 25,000 people in Moscow. So he's going to Russia. So now what? What's the next plan? And I thought about it, and I couldn't come up with an answer. But there I was at UPW last Saturday, just 1 week ago. And Gil comes to me and he says, Stephen, I want you to meet a friend of mine, a really good guy. I don't know what you guys are going to talk about, but you're going to talk about something, and I know you guys are going to change the world. Now, Gil is a very perceptive person. He's also an amazing network guru. He brings the right people together. So we went out of UPW, we sat outside, and I told this guy my story. And this guy was the guy who brought Eckhart Tolle to Russia with Gil, and he's very connected. He lived 15 years with the Dalai Lama. That's how he met Tony Robbins and Sage. We're talking about a connected guy. He puts on every year in July a big festival in Sweden. And I told him my story, and he said he had a dream, the same dream. He also wanted to affect world peace. And we had to do something about this. And he had an idea, which was to do a festival. And then we decided that this festival should go around the world. And the best way to do that is to get online. And so we are looking to attract 500 million people to come online on a particular day. And that particular day will be, if I remember rightly, 21st of September 2020. 21st of September. Does anyone know what that is? World Peace Day. Thank you. United Nations World Peace Day. And we chose 2020 because this is our 2020 vision. And more little things over this week have happened that have made me realize that this is not just an idea, it's not just a thought, but this is a destiny, and this is something that really will happen. Little things. Okay, this color, the reason why I wore these today. This is Carl's color, the Yes Group. He's had it for 23 years, 25 years. This is Meat Partner's color. In fact, both sides said, did they steal that color from me? I said, no. You know, Meat Partners, I remember when you first started out as a speed dating party. That's how it started, Meat Partners. That's what it all was. And this was their color. And I know Carl's had this color for ages. And so when I went online to find out what date was the day, it was International Peace Day, and there was the United Nations flag. Does anyone know what color the United Nations flag is? Now, synchronicity is a great way of the universe telling you you're on track. When things start falling into place, you know you're going down the right route. You know that things are working out and that you've done the right choices. And I know that. But I don't really know exactly how we're going to get 500 million people on one day. But I still got another sign this week that things are working in the right direction. Has anyone seen the news recently? Sort of Donald Trump, whether we like him or not. But I'm talking about the two guys in Korea, North and South, who shook hands and crossed the line. Now, do you remember the news a few months ago? What was going on with North Korea? What they were going to do? Were they going to walk across the line? Were they going to shake hands and make a difference? Now, how comes that happened just days after I spoke, well, actually, one day after I spoke to all of you and I put out there my dream? Who was at Yes Group this week? Who remembers that silly guy in the blue hat who stood up and said he's going to attract 500 million people online? How do you think that will affect the world? How do you think that mindset will affect the world and shift where we are when instead of preparing for war, we prepare for peace? Do you guys want to be part of that 500 million? Do you really want to be part of that 500 million? Do you really want to be part of that 500 million? I'd just like you to go home and think, how can you help me? This is a crusade for good. This is a crusade for the world. This is a crusade for our children. I don't want my son growing up being afraid of war every day. I want him to live in peace, and I want everyone else on this planet to live in peace. If you'd like to join me, think of an idea how you can help me. Think of something you can do. I don't have all the ideas. I don't have all the plans. I just know this must happen because nothing's impossible. I'm possible. Thank you.